I am very, very pleased, honored to be in the presence of Robert A. Thurman, Bob, who I must say just had a birthday on August 3rd. He turned 79.
That's right.
And we say happy birthday to you. We're so glad you're with us.
Thank you.
I was saying to Jim Fadiman yesterday that there was a little discussion on NPR, the difference between old fogies and old codgers.
Oh,
And I
really?
think of us as old codgers rather than old fogies because we're trying to stay hip and in it. And you've done great. So Bob is the retired now professor emeritus of Indo-Tibetan Buddhist Studies at Columbia, where he had been for decades, a
Yeah.
founder of Tibet House with Richard Gere and who's your other co-founder?
Phil Glass
Yeah,
and
which,
and the Halama, actually, really, basically.
which remains a seminal outpost of Tibetan Buddhism in the West, and a founder of the American Institute of Buddhist Studies, and so many books to his credit. I'm still with the trip that you did with Circling the Mountain when you did the slideshow, and
Oh, yes,
you were
yes.
out here, and
Blade Wheel of Mind Reform.
yeah, you did that amazing slideshow of Circling Kailash, and in that book, it was one of the most memorable tantras that I have ever come across. This whirling sword
Yes, yes.
tantra,
The
the,
Blade Wheel, like.
yeah, the Great
Yeah.
Wheel, and I practiced that for about a year. Of course, I
Really?
forgot
No
most of it.
kidding.
I loved it. I love tantra, and I thought that was great. In a revolution, which to me was kind of it was a bit of a political propaganda piece for Tibet, and was
Okay.
received as such. But it really extolled the best of what there was in Tibetan culture and its nature, and I thought was a remarkable piece in terms
Oh,
of,
that's great.
of making a political statement and a cultural statement about what is good in the world and what can be good in the world. And then this one, which I am back to again, which will be a form of torture for me for the rest of my life, the central philosophy of Tibet, Tsongkhapa's essence of true eloquence, which you said took what, 12 years
Yeah,
to
I
do?
worked on it for about 12 years. Yeah.
So there's so much more. And our topic today is meditation and psychedelics. And I sent you a list of questions, but I'm viewing this as a back and forth between psychedelic consciousness, of which I know you have some, and you'll talk about it, and Buddhist consciousness,
Yes.
because you're a precious treasure of Buddhist awareness and Dharma, and I would like to have our viewers and myself benefit from some of that as we go through all of this. So maybe we'll start a little bit with the personal. Um, you know, your history is so interesting and so broad. So you are married to Nina, who was married to Leary. So
That's
Tim
right.
Leary and she were
That was
married
we each we've been 53 years now in our second marriages.
right.
Because I was also married to an older woman, and she was married to an older man. I was married to an older woman, also at very young. I was married at 18 and lasted for 2 years.
But
And
she was married to Leary between 64 and 65,
right.
and you got married in 67. So did you have any Millbrook adventures? What
Yeah,
happened
sure. Yeah,
down there?
that's where we met. And what happened was, you know, I had was married from 59 to 61. And then I went east to try to get enlightened or something, and met the Tibetans, and then became a monk after a little bit back and forth. And then when at a certain point in being a monk back in the States in 65, 6, I decided I was going to help Leary because I knew Tim from Harvard before that, and Richard and Ralph Metzner and some others in that circle. And
Did you, by the way, did you know Gunther Weil?
Yeah, sure. I still know Gunter Weil.
Yeah, Gunther's going to
I
do an
haven't seen him
interview.
in years. I haven't seen him in
He's
years.
marvelous. He's going to do an interview with me tomorrow.
Oh, that's great. Give him my love. Yeah, Gunter and I used to go to the Schwitz, the sweat bath, the hot sweat bath. So I love Gunter, but I haven't seen him in a long time. I think he's in Colorado nowadays or something.
He is. He's around Boulder. He's doing pretty well.
Right, I heard that, and he's occasionally he sent. We've had a bit of email exchange, but not much. We're both so busy. Probably I am anyway, and then I went to Millbrook to help Tim. I thought to cool out in his struggle with the government in late '65. That he was early '66, and I thought my plan was to, because I've been a monk and meditating for a few years, I thought they could use meditation and cool down the acid and everything like that. And so I was going to go and be an instructor at Millbrook of how to meditate without having to take actual psychedelic, because they knew I had done that quite a bit myself before becoming a monk, when I was in my first marriage, around the end of my first marriage. So then I did stay there for a while. And then actually, luckily, I realized at some point in that process that in order to get them to listen to what I was trying to share with them, I would have to get stoned again. So they would think I wasn't just a monk because of having had a bad trip or something. So I did, and I had to say that it had such a powerful, if the experience of it based on some Buddhist practice was 10 times what it had been before, or well, it's always infinite, I guess I have to say so. But it was really great, actually. It was very, very helpful, deepened stuff enormously. And, but I still also tried to get them to stop, not conflict with the authorities, And then I left there just when I had an intuition that there was something going to go wrong. And they have in the myth of Millbrook, they have me warning them that Gordon, what's the name of that weird guy?
Gordon Liddy.
Yeah, Gordon Liddy was about to attack them. And actually, a few days after I left, he did. It was really weird. But I don't know why I had that intuition, but I did. And so I had a nice time there. And then Nina, who had been already over a year separated and trying to get a divorce from Tim and had gone through the divorce, Tim was refusing to sign the final papers. So she came up to Millbrook a couple of times to try to get him to sign the papers. And then she had a little bit of a trip. And she was back in New York modeling and so on. And then we met. And then I decided, I had a vision or something, and I decided to quit being a monk, that I wasn't able to really do what karmically I was supposed to do as a monk. And that was a very fraught for me, because in Tibetan way, you take that vow for life. And I didn't want Dalai Lama and my other Tibetan teachers to be mad at me, but I just felt that I had to do it. And my old teacher in America had told me not to be a formal monk because I had a different karma, and I wouldn't listen like an idiot. So then when I did realize what he meant, I gave up being a monk. I left Millbrook at that time. And then that old teacher of mine said, well, I told you not to be a monk, so it's okay. And then he wouldn't take me back, or wouldn't take me anywhere else. He brought me back to Millbrook, actually. He was clairvoyant, that guy. And then I met Nina as an ex-monk, and then then we had a history.
It's a good thing you dropped the clothes in order to meet Nina.
What?
It's a good thing you dropped the cloth in order to meet Nina, I think.
Well, I dropped before. She doesn't take responsibility for me doing that.
Okay.
I had just dropped it, actually, about like a week before that time. And then I left Millbrook because they weren't listening to me, and I was afraid they were going to get in more trouble. And then I met, though. Then I was open-minded, but it was the way I met her was also very, very interesting. And I'll save that for a later date. But I had an amazing meeting with her anyway. And then Tim finally relented after some little bit of confrontation, not too much. And he actually said something that was funny, turned out to be right. He said, I wonder, when we did start to get together, which was not, we had some ups and downs at first, but because the ex-monk and the ex-model, everybody on both sides thought we were nuts, you know. And Tim said, "Oh, I wondered when those two Tibetan refugees were going to get together." He said, I thought that was, but on the other hand, he was a little bit begrudging because, of course, he wasn't really wanting to let go of her. You know, it's a little bit Rumpelstiltskin, you know, and getting her out of the tower type of thing. So anyway, but it was kind of fun, you know.
It sounds like an amazing time. So let me go back to what you were talking about in terms of this blossoming that occurred from your, I assume, LSD experience.
Yes.
Because one of the things that I've been writing about and practicing in my way with Buddhism, I'm a Dzogchen guy, a Namkai Norbu guy by a few decades.
Good.
And we can talk about those ways of thinking about absolutes, etc. But one of the things I've felt in my work with psychedelics throughout my time with it, and psychedelics are very various, as you know, in terms of their impacts. But using the ketamine model, I have felt that its enhancement of meditative awareness and of non-attachment has been extremely powerful, and maybe the most powerful source of its effects in terms of helping people to leave what's so difficult and have a hiatus in which there's a new exploration of a liberated space and then a return. And I wonder how you see it, because I do see psychedelics as offering an upgrade, in a sense, a rapid movement into meditation. So tell me your view about it.
Definitely, you know, because of the illegality and the difficulty of the culture accepting the energy explosion of the 60s, which was very, very necessary in our evolution beyond our problems of racism and colonialism and blah, blah, blah. You know, and it was really huge. But then there's that whole faction, which we see now in glorious, you know, reality TV in front of us at the moment, of the culture accepting. So because of that, and because of its, then the illegality done by Nixon and so on, you know, everyone sort of had to go underground, you know, for 20, 30 years, which is too bad, because the psychedelics are incredibly valuable door opener, because they temporarily suspend the conceptual conditioning framework within which we imprison all of our experience, and don't really touch the deeper level of reality that would really satisfy us in our life. But because we're always fitting everything that happens to us into some preconceived idea. And so we have we just follow some sort of habitual conditioned path, and we basically feel resentful about that, and we have irritated and so forth, and life is unrewarding, and meanwhile we're greedy and angry and etc. So it's a really wonderful and useful thing, and all indigenous cultures use these things, and it was a huge breakthrough from Hoffman, and then from Tim and Richard and all these people. And but on the other hand, then if people then just get used to it and they want to stay that way, then it has turned out to be something difficult to handle. So it was very good that initially, at the time when it was introduced, it was not illegal, it was experimental. A lot of psychiatrists were using it therapeutically, they were investigating it. And because it got so public, and because of the social stress in the Vietnam War, the protests, the whole thing, it got shoved under, you know. And now I think it's coming back to where it can be really well used, and possibly, you know, like Ram Dass, for example, was a total veteran of psychedelic adventuring, or psychonauting, let's call it, psychonautical adventures. And a lot, you know, he learned a lot from Maharaji, opened his heart with that. But on the other hand, he wouldn't have been able to meet Maharaji that way if he hadn't had a huge heart opening and brain opening by his tremendous amount of psychedelic adventure.
Well, in that regard, isn't it true that most of the people we know who are, you know, Buddhist practitioners of consequence have had periods of
Oh,
psychedelic.
absolutely. But then
These-
nobody would give it credit, for a long time
right?
because it was illegal, so it was like, oh no, we don't use for that anymore. We just meditate, ram, ram, or mani padme hum. And that was necessary and good for a long period of time. But now it may be that it's coming, since Michael Pollan wrote his wonderful book, it's kind of coming out of the closet and it's coming into a sensible use now, positive. I believe even the Army generals, they really want it to be usable therapeutically in the VA system for their PTSD people, because it's by far the best thing for that, for example. And since everybody who grows up in the nuclear industrial family in the late era of polluting industrialization, which we're having to stop now, and transform into something cleaner, then this becomes necessary. Everybody has some kind of PTSD about it.
Are you aware of Stephen Batchelor's new book on and he comes out for his recent use of ayahuasca and
Oh no,
past
he's
use?
getting into ayahuasca now. Oh, good.
No, you should read the new book. Is a lovely little book.
I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, he just published it, and he comes clean. Now, I've been a student of his for a long time, and if there was one person who never ever really alluded to his use, which was like yours, preceded his going into the monastery, and then
Yeah.
recently, it was Stephen, and so there's this
Oh, I'm very
remarkable
pleased to hear
outpouring.
that.
Yeah. No, it's a lovely book. It's on solitude, it's called. He just came out with it.
What's it called?
Solitude.
Oh, okay. Oh, solitude. Okay, good. I'll have to look for that.
And so many others, have been through it. So let me ask you back biographically. Did you continue to use psychedelics at all, if I may ask?
Yeah, sure. A little bit when I got back there, but then in my long, what shall I call it, ordeal of getting a PhD, having a livelihood as a penniless ex-monk with an ex-model who hadn't exactly invested all of her. Well, she was a supermodel, but she supported all artists and friends and very generous, open-hearted. So, and even gave money to Philbrook. So we were both a bit broke, and I had to make a living. And so then I had to go back into the university system and this and that, taught for 50 years, got a PhD and taught for 50 years. And during that time, I didn't really have time to do it. A, B, didn't really have any. So, wasn't really able to do that. But luckily, had some meditative practice that kept me still open, let's say, and kept me doing like that. And I haven't really had time. Now I'm retired, and I'm very open to doing it. If there was a Burning Man, I wouldn't mind. In fact, I don't think I could go there if I wouldn't be a little bit lubricated in my brain. But it's too dusty for me. I believe too hot and dusty. But so I hope to use it again in some way, but although I don't officially do it, and I'm kind of cool about it, but I'm going to write an autobio myself. I'm sort of have one that I will pull together in the next year or two. I better, or I might croak, In Tibetan way, actually, if Tibetans count a year ahead, so I'm actually 80 in Tibetan way, And
0 to 1 does count.
What?
0 to 1 does count as a year.
Right. That's right. You spent almost a year in the mother's belly.
So
right?
let me jog your memory for a moment. So 2016, we're both together at Faux Mirage, which is the camp that had the area where people gave talks that David Bronner sponsored. It was the area, remember, where people got hosed down from the dust naked in chambers that were up on
yes, I remember sitting there with you. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and so you gave a talk there, and it was a memorable talk, and I actually took it and wrote a little piece quoting from you and Jack, and I forget who else.
I remember, yeah.
Tricycle, and you actually came out and you started talking about the Buddhist precepts against intoxication, and you were making a distinction between psychedelics as not as habitual things. Can you speak to that again?
Well, absolutely. Well, I never in my life touched even an ounce of any opiate, and except painkiller in the dentist's office. And somebody once gave me a sniff of cocaine, and I thought I was back in the dentist's office. It did not give me a buzz at all. And so those stimulants, either uppers or downers, are really they are intoxicating, whereas the psychedelics are far from intoxicating, because what they do is they open you into a direct non-conceptual contact with reality, and which is what starts with hallucination and so on, as the Book of the Dead properly anciently describes. And they are deep learning. They are learning, entheogenics, as Houston Smith called them, and they help you get a deeper grip on your inner working and the world around you. And cultures that are more peaceful and where people are more cheerful, they use them for vision quests for people. And our authoritarian Western European society, Euro-American societies have never really easily explored this level, just like we had very few mystics. We often killed our mystics, actually. The Abrahamic religious groups often persecuted those who had some sort of direct experience of the divine and of nature and so on. And so that kind of thing was suppressed in our culture until recently. And that's made us more uneasy, and we conquered everybody else because we were more unhappy, looking for something by conquering somebody, which never does really make you happy. So, you get something physical out of it, but you get more uptight yourself. So, the master gets uptight by having to have the slave, So that's the thing. It's I don't consider they can't be addictive, because they reveal to someone very powerfully more reality about themselves and about the world, and some aspect of that can be scary, etc. And people, only the nicest people like to have themselves revealed to themselves, So it's a very powerful thing, and it should be used therapeutically and educationally. In a sane, non-violent, happy, non-polluting, non-destructive society. And hopefully we have to get to a society like that on this whole planet. We, the colonialists, and they, the formerly colonialized, we have to get there, and we have to do it PDQ. Or we're all pretty much fried,
I think,
keep it up like
you're moving us into the next segment of my intention. If I'm looking correctly at the tanka behind you, is that the thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara?
It is. Yes, it is. You saw it correctly.
Okay, so I want to quote you from a little piece from Tsongkhapa in your eloquent introduction. The conveying the central teaching of the central way, the teaching of relativity, or as it can be translated in a metaphysical rather than a critical context, dependent origination. The great central way master here salutes Shakyamuni as the foremost of philosophers, primarily as a master of illuminating speech. But the transcendent wisdom, and here I have to break for a moment, is that the essence is emptiness and relativity are equivalent, but the development of the supreme energy of the universe, which the Buddha called great compassion, rather than nuclear energy or gravitation or electromagnetism. So the great energy of the universe is symbolized by the tanka behind you, is the great energy of compassion.
Absolutely. And 1,000 arms and 1,000 eyes,
And we're in a moment of terrible difficulty. And you also write about optimism, in a sense. People have made the mistake of thinking that history is a single vector of a progression of emancipation over time, and that, of course, is not the case. That there are Kali Yugas, dark periods, etc. So, how are you in this time of terrible trauma, COVID, racism, global climate change? How are you keeping your head above water? How do you keep a sense of optimism. How would you advise us in this central, really this central
Yes, well,
question of Buddhism in this way?
well, the reason I'm optimistic, which is that I think I have finally come to understand a little more about what the role of the Buddha is in the world, and the sort of power of the Buddha. And this is revealed in the Vimalakirti Sutra, which is what I was so lucky someone commissioned me to retranslate it, or translate it. Actually, there were existing some some translations from the Chinese, but there was no translation from Tibetan, and at the time they did it, the Sanskrit was not available. It has become available since then, and has a version of the Sanskrit. And in that sutra, it shows that this world is not a Kali Yuga because of the Shakyamuni's visit to it. And he, underneath the surface of it, and the surface, it looks like a Kali Yuga, getting worse and worse. But on the deeper level, the beings are being ripened to come to that Shangri-La kind of, Shambhala kind of future. And this is then elaborated very much in the Kala Chakra Tantra, and that's where it's really more deeply elaborated. But so that gives me real hope. And then on a visceral level, on a sort of, let's say, historical level, in spite of all the horrible Holocausts and wars and genocides and crap that's going on, and even Tibet is still under kind of genocide, for example, which I'm in the Tibet House and everything, we're working to try to preserve the culture and to see to it that Tibet can be reborn at some stage, And so at a visceral level, maybe I should tell you one experience I had, which was actually not psychedelic. There was no substance involved, because I was in India in 1971. I didn't have anything, and I don't consider pot to be that. To me, it was never that psychedelic. It was just relaxing, and hash or pot, And I didn't have anything with me at the time, but it was right before Kissinger went to China. 1971, and Nixon had locked up a bunch of people in Washington, D.C. in the Redskin Stadium, the protesters of the Vietnam War.
Yeah, I was there.
Allen Ginsberg came to India, Ronnie Lang, and these people. It was a very apocalyptic time. And I had just been initiated into something called Hayagriva Mandala, which is a fierce form of this Avalokiteshvara, the 1,000-armed, 1,000-eyed, 11-headed, incarnation of the compassion of all enlightened beings. And I had this dream on the night of that initiation, which was such a weird dream. It was really cool though, where I was flying in the sky with Hayagriva. I was like on his back, and which was, I don't know, he was transparent in a way because I was seeing the world through him. And Brezhnev was about to nuke China, and Nixon was abetting him to do so. And he actually pressed a bunch of buttons to nuke Mao. He hated Mao. They were having a war between China and Russia on the north of China. This time of summer of 71. And Hayagriva was not going to have it, I noticed. And he kept pressing the button. And Hayagriva has this supernova flame hair, like a more powerful than nuclear fission or hydrogen bomb, but like hydrogen fusion hair. And Hayagriva, and I could feel it because I was on his back. And I was baffled, why I was there. It was a dream, really was a dream. And he took his hair and he jammed it down into all the electric circuitry of the nuclear weapon machinery, from the Kremlin to the silos or whatever it was. And this hair went into all of it. And then I was somehow able to understand Russian. And Tim Leary was in Switzerland, by the way, at the time. And his presence there was really part of the dream. I don't know why. He was somehow moderating or I don't know what he was doing, the connection, the red phone connection between Nixon and Brezhnev, and he was involved in stopping something about that. I don't know what it was. I know he was running away from Eldridge Cleaver, I think, actually.
Yeah, he was running away from Algeria. Yeah, he was running away from Algeria.
And he just went whack like this with his hair. And then the Russians were saying, well, we're sorry, sir, but there's nothing wrong with anything, but we're not getting the signal. We're turning the key, we get the signal from you, and whatever football the Russians have, but it's not happening. And Brezhnev was not happening. Then I remember seeing Brezhnev kind of going like this, and it looked like he was masturbating, actually. And then suddenly, this went on for some time, but they couldn't understand. And a call was going to Nixon, and with the CIA interfering, and then no, and all this kind of thing. And it just won't fly, the missiles. And then I remember in the dream, my old Mongolian teacher, who said to me once during one of those kind of conversations people get into where it's all going down the drain and maybe we'll have nuclear war now, a few years earlier. And he made this thing like, no way, well, I'll guarantee we'll never have that. And he would occasionally make statements like that were like prophetic, and you never forgot them, And I somehow remember that in the dream. And then at one point, both Nixon and Brezhnev looked up. And I don't know what and they looked at me, rather at Hayagriva, and I don't know what they saw. Maybe they saw some sort of archangel in their unconscious. I have no idea. But they totally looked subdued, and they totally dropped it. And they decided to really give it up. And then it was a very wonderful feeling, It was really great seeing sort of mind and love and this fierce compassion block electronic signals that would have killed millions of people,
So how do you?
And then at the end of the dream, this you'll really you have to laugh. I have to just one last thing, just to finish the dream.
Please.
There's one thing that then to the very end, I sort of looked sideways from where I was in the Himalayas, in a place called Dalhousie. I was in Dalhousie, and this sort of Dalai Lama was meditating over in the corner, looking. I don't know. He didn't know. I mean, he wasn't involved in it, but he was sitting there. I didn't receive this initiation from him, from someone else, and from one of his teachers. And then, to my amazement, I saw the face of Zhou Enlai. And Zhou Enlai was also seeing Hayagriva and the Dalai Lama, and he was laughing. And he was saying, ha, ha, ha. You see, why you even try to deal with us? You can't even hurt your enemies. Ha, ha, ha.
So how did you integrate such a thing? Did you feel there's some sort of divine intervention?
It was just a dream, okay? It was just a dream, but it was a vivid dream. It was like a trip, but it wasn't a trip. It was no benevolent chemicals were involved, except from in my own body,
But
it was magic. It was total magic. It was magic. So
you feel there was,
if there is a narrative from Shakyamuni's time to now, where all these male chauvinist, patriarchal, violent cultures, which have been having wars on and off, tribal and everything, for about 5,000 years, without maybe 10,000. If you listen to Maria Gimbutas, maybe 10,000 years, and the last 10,000 years. And we now have reached this point where war and violence just doesn't cut it. And the domineering, nasty husbands, the ones who just have the 10th trophy wife and all this kind of thing, with their money and their power and everything, they can't control the force of love, and they are too miserable, and they're just lashing around, and they want to have another world war. If this was the usual pattern, we'd be having another one by now already. So all those dictators would be able to confuse their people even more about some other enemy, because they only rule by fear, which we're seeing just now in this day, in the evening, the try to attempt to promote fear to keep in power, and they're losing it, and they are just ridiculous, It's like it's an unreality show, not a reality show. And we're coming to the brink of a time when we're going to make it work. We're going to cool the planet. We're going to not have a war. We're going to have a real democracies everywhere. The authoritarian weirdo creeps are showing their irrelevance, and it's going to happen. But it is, and one of the big factors is that the Euro-American, very warlike, almost like Titanic type of cultures that are based on violence and patriarchality, they have reached a point of like self-implosion, where their own skill at violence has rebounded back against themselves and they can't use it anymore. So they have to now come to gentleness, and they have to come to self-understanding, and they have to surrender to nature, you could say, and realize of their interconnectedness to nature. The scientists reached it in 1926 at the Copenhagen time, when they realized they couldn't control the subatomic particles, and there was energies there that they couldn't even cope with. And even today, they still are trying to run away from that. But they have talked about dark energy as 97% of it holding their rickety model together. And where's the dark energy? We didn't see it yet.
Let me intervene for a second. So
okay, sure.
That brings up.
That's what I wanted to say.
No. You're doing great, and I don't mean to interrupt, but you bring up such amazing stuff like questions of agency. So people are not voluntarily throwing themselves off their thrones. You don't see Trump saying, "Oh, I'm a good boy now. I've reached realization, and I'm going to, make up for all my past deeds." So let's talk about agency for a moment and the Dharma.
Well, he's a kind of demon, that guy. He himself is a kind of demon, and but he's just lashing out. If you read Mary Trump's book, he's a really pathetic character who didn't have a mom, and was pushed around by a brutal father from the little time, and taught to push other people around but he's basically miserable. And therefore he grabs people and things and does all this stuff, but he has
what do you see as the agency of human beings who are moving towards the Dharma, and how do we confront this? We're doing a whole program on.
I don't consider this a Buddhist thing. They're not moving toward the Dharma like everybody needs Buddhism.
I agree.
I agree with Dalai Lama about that. It's not Buddhism, but in the heart of every being, there is this what we call, what you could call a Buddha nature, or you could call it a soul of love and compassion and wisdom, which is the direct thing that experiences the world. And even the most evil person has that thing. And what makes them evil is that it's inaccessible to them. They get wrapped around it in these coils of frustration and misery, and therefore they want to inflict that, and they're desperately grabbing at others in a violent way, which makes it worse instead of better. And but they all have in their own heart this other thing. And the cure for some of them who are really bad is death. When they go through death, like in the near-death experience, they go straight into the white tunnel, and then they finally get to relax. And then they get born somewhere, and then unfortunately they may get born in bad places.
So one of the things we're doing within the foundation, we just put up our website, is called Indra's Net Coalition. And Indra, you know what Indra's Net is? It's a collection of all.
I'm sorry, which tech coalition?
Indra's Net.
Remember Indra's Net Coalition. Yeah, great.
Because wonderful. We see the world is connected by each of us being a jewel. That some jewels are dim, and we're trying to light those jewels up by a process of sharing. So our notion is that if we facilitate sharing groups around trauma all across the world, not by psychotherapy, but by sharing, we can do 6 groups. We're supporting them, they're free. That we can begin through the process of self-expression, sharing of grief and trauma, and create a kind of activism. So we see that as a little bit of agency in the world. It feels right now like there's such a terrible storm of terror against people, and the global climate change is so awful, and terrible shootings like the.
You guys had like 11,000 lightning strikes in California, did you?
Yeah, I'm in smoke. I live there. I'm in full in smoke. But more than those natural phenomena, there's also, the Black Lives Matter, the racist issue, Africa in a sense dying, whole continents moving into terrible. I know. So these are small changes. I imagine you and I, as we exit our lives, are not in the most happy moments of, this is all that we started, and look where it went, and how good it all is, and we've conquered misogyny and misanthropy,
I
and
know.
racism. You know, it's a little harsh. Do you feel it? Do you feel it at all?
Yes, yes. Well, the thing is, though, that we are getting there. There has been some improvement, you know. Like my wife, for example, even all I've been through, she has still not accepted me as her disciple. I'm still a novitiate. And but she says I have shown some improvement from my male chauvinist wasp upbringing, you know, by the help of Dalai Lamas and Mongolians and everything. But I'm still not fully accepted because I still interrupt. You know, I think I'm finishing her thought, but actually I'm interrupting it and not getting the full benefit of it. Still, I still have the habit. So it's not easy, you know. And but we're getting there. And in a way, I think, you know, I am haunted by Edgar Casey at the moment.
Oh,
Totally.
I'm so sorry.
But you know what? Did you know what he said? He lived in Virginia Beach, you know,
Yeah.
and he said that when someday there's going to be a black man who's going to be the president of the United States, and that will be the end of the United States, he said. And he wasn't a racist himself at all. He was being, you know, realistic in what he thought in terms of the ways people were around him. And so we're seeing, I think in a way, it is that we're at the end of it. You know, we're led by someone who is aligned with every enemy of the United States, the American Revolution that we've ever had, starting with the British colonialists, the East India Company, the Civil War, the rebels, you know, the Nazis, the Russians. He's every enemy we ever had. He is an agent of them, and he's ruling us, showing how self-destructive we became. I mean, as a collective. And so I think that it's the end, so we have to start anew. And I think we will, you know. But I do worry. So it's not that I'm that, but the reason I mentioned the dream is I know it's completely crazy and it's just a dream. And it looks like we are at the end. And, you know, there's nothing going to happen, you know, the Paris Accord. I mean, you know, forget about it. But I did go, the minute I retired last summer, I went to Al Gore's Climate Reality Project training in Minneapolis. And I got that training, and then I've been looking into it, and I follow all of these things, and we can easily defeat the oil and fossil fuel industry and the militarists and everything and have a decent planet. And it's in their interest to actually do it. And they don't even want to go and drill in the Arctic. You know, they don't want to have Trump's idiot people undoing the EPA and everything. They don't even want it now. They realize their days are numbered, you know.
So let me interrupt you again. I'm sure Nina could educate me a bit on this, but
No, I don't mind. It's good to interrupt me, you know. I'm glad to.
but I want to turn a little bit towards the Dharma in all
Yes,
this,
okay.
because I respect you so much in that, and you've written and so extensively on the issues of intrinsic identity.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, the debate between you and Batchelor, which I was at actually, over his abandonment of absolutes.
Oh, really? Way back on Central Park West?
Yeah. I would love to hear how any of that's evolved in you, because I think you were characterized a bit harshly in the debate, because I don't think I've been reading Tsongkhapa again, and the whole issue of what is absolute and what is ultimate reality and non-ultimate, and all that complexity. But maybe you could distill a little bit for our audience who would love to get a bit of
that debate, you know, that was not really a debate, you understand. It was promoted, not even by that much by Stephen. It was promoted as if it was a big debate, but the debate began when Stephen said, well, he didn't really think there wasn't a future life, he just didn't know.
Right.
So that was like conceding the debate ahead of time. You know, in other words, they tried to put it like he's against the form of future life, which is sort of an American immature Zen view. And I think the more mature Zen view, they've gotten past that quite a bit. Not everyone, but quite a few of them. And I am representing the view that the former future life and the continuity of life and that we've all lived many, many lifetimes beginninglessly, and we will continue living them endlessly. And the default position is that. That's the common sense position. The completely abstruse and insane position is that any energy continuum could ever be nothing. That's true. People, if they're going to say that, they have to prove that, because nobody's ever witnessed it. And they've never experienced that. Nobody ever experienced nothing. And they never will, actually, by the meaning of the word, you know, because there's no such thing, is the point. So therefore, it wasn't really a debate, you know. And as far
So,
as, but you know, the other thing,
let me ask you to clarify that. So are you then saying that what is absolute is the presence of E equals MC squared, that the nature of the universe is constant in its interaction between energy and material, so that nothing disappears, really?
yes.
Is
So
that what you're saying?
to think that, well, nothing disappears because nothing isn't there.
Exactly.
But no, something disappears. In other words, that's the conservation of energy. Then they go, oh yeah, but we have entropy. Well, so that can take a while, entropy, but it's still, the energy is still there. So the point is, every single materialist who argues that they're going to be nothing when they die, which means that essentially they are nothing right now, they have no soul, and they did that to escape from the Inquisition, and I applaud them for doing so. But still, anybody who argues that is going on a blind faith in something that nobody has experienced, because there's no experience of nothing. It's ridiculous to say there could be, you see, and they have that when they talk of energy. And so the point is that that is the way the relative universe obviously works. But if anybody wants to make it be some other way, then they should have to prove that. So that came to me only, I would say, 10 years ago. I finally, because I had so many arguments with different natural science types and social scientists who are trying to be natural scientists, and then humanities philosophers who want to be handmaidens of natural scientists because they're the high priests of the secularist, troops division.
But again, on my part, my interruption, where have you gone with reincarnationism?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's an obvious thing. In other words,
but is there a soul transfer? Is there?
Yeah, sure.
Are there souls moving around looking for wombs?
Buddha never denies the existence of the relational soul, and if you define it as the super subtle, something like a DNA molecule, but this is a non-material pattern that transmits, that constantly changes, and you can be a dinosaur and an animal and a crocodile right after you die if you insist on it, and in other words, you will not remember being Phil, and I won't remember being Bob. We would be whatever we are, and we can go from other planets. So there's a continuum of super subtle energy. I call it like a spiritual or a mental DNA. And that's the obvious thing. That's what's in the Buddhist science. That's what the Buddhist science argues. Although the Buddhist science does say this. It says that reality, whatever it is, when you say absolute, you mean really actual. The real reality, not the illusory one, so which is this one, but the actual one. In reality, no theory can ever capture what's going on. So in a way, even the karma, which means simply causation of relativity, even karma is, any particular description of it is more or less valid within a particular context, but it's never an absolute dogma. If you follow me, with karma, it's a relational law, but not an absolute law. So there's no absolute dogma. If anybody can discover nothing, if they can, the American Physicists Association, if they can come up with a foolproof proof that nothing exists, they're welcome to it, and we would really go for that. It's like Carl Sagan once asked the Dalai Lama. We have it on videotape. He said, "Your Holiness, what would you do if we made a foolproof experiment with every angle covered, and we proved empirically beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was no reincarnation? What would you do?" The Dalai Lama looked thoughtful for a moment, and he said, "Well, I'd stop believing in it," he said. And Sagan was like, "Huh? How? What?" Yeah, I said, if the evidence is there, I'll stop believing it. I said, of course.
Well, that's been a great
deal. Then there was a couple of beats, and then Dalai Lama speaks to Sagan. He says, how are we going to go about setting up that experiment? And of course, saying it, So it took me 15 years of being aware of that little exchange to realize that the main argument is we don't have to prove reincarnation or rebirth, whatever you want to call it. You get anybody who wants to say that anything can be nothing has to prove that, because in fact that's impossible to prove, because you will never experience that. There is even a meditative experience that seems like nothing that the Buddha even said you can achieve. It was one of the things one of his teachers, when he was right out of the gate before he went for his 6 years of asceticism, one of them was he reached a kind of what they thought of was the nothingness state. And he realized, Buddha immediately realized that's not a nothingness. That's a state projecting my idea of nothing into a state. But it's not nothing because I got in it and I'm getting out of it. And I came back out of it. So it's definitely not nothing. So anyway, that's that. But my point there is, therefore, we all are dying and living, and we have been for thousands of years, and we will continue to be. And eventually we decided too boring to live so selfishly and harmfully and violently. And we wise up and we'll let the women take the lead, and we'll be happy, and we will fix the planet. See, that's the thing, Shunyata Karuna Garbham. I know you like the Dharma film. Shunyata Karuna Garbham. Voidness, the womb of compassion. It's Nagarjuna's favorite statement, and it's a huge statement all over all the tantras, especially Kala Chakra. And it means that when you reach emptiness by realization, by analytically using critical reason, you analytically demolish all conceptual structures, which one acid trip won't enable you to, but it will open the door to the process for sure. And you use critical reason, however, you need to use your concepts to do it. You can't just do it by temporarily falling out of your concepts, because the concepts will reassert themselves. The patterns are so deeply ingrained. They reach the instinctual level. But when you do that, and then you come out into like an open space, and there's a trap there, because some people do that and they think, oh, that's emptiness, and I'll go back there later. And they imagine an absolute that's outside of relativity. But when you do it really completely, the momentum of the analysis, of the penetration, of the critical prajna, wisdom, makes you realize, well, this space is also, what is it? And the disappeared state disappears. And the nothingness state, the emptiness state, they were sort of slightly different. They both disappear, and then relativity is there. Because relativity is the emptiness. You see, the emptiness is the relativity. It doesn't underlie it or be outside of it or something, it is all of these things, and that's what it says, emptiness equals relativity, I'm saying, and it's a more thorough relativity than Einstein's, because Einstein made the speed of light an absolute, because that's kind of a barrier for matter. Because when it goes faster than, when a particle goes at that speed, its mass becomes infinite, and therefore it's meaningless to be a particle, because it already is everywhere or something like that. So he kind of hit the clear light there, but he thought that was a boundary of a material universe, because he was forced to consider the universe was material only. Mind can go beyond speed of light to instantaneous transcendence of distance and time. It's not issue for mind.
Exactly.
But the matter cannot, And he was up to it, but he re-absolutized the boundary of the relativity that he found through his thought, through his meditations, which were thought experiments. Really, is how he found it. But he absolutized the kind of boundary state. And there is a danger for those great yogis and yoginis who reach the emptiness, that they will reach a boundary state like that, and then they'll absolutize that and think that nirvana is here. Then when they come out of it, and they'll run around for a few years and think they'll go back there. And that's what we call dualistic Buddhism, or Theravada Buddhism, where they project nirvana as off planet, if you will.
Well, you've never taken rationality and exploration off the table. It's been the principal aspect of your
argument. There's not rationality.
Exploration
takes you right to the mirror surface. It takes you to the mirror surface, but it doesn't control what's in the mirror.
Correct.
But you don't have to leap from some other place to hit the mirror surface. The rationality, that's the first title of that book that you have there. the original title of it was called Speech of Gold,
Yep.
Reason and Enlightenment in the something in the philosophy of central philosophy of Tibet, something like that. And so it's that reason, the critical, like in Zen, the koan, or the in the rinzai, and in the soto, the koan of being sitting on a pillow when you feel like shit and you're told you're a Buddha, which is a super koan, and that koan brings you a critical reason into conflict, showing the contradictions in your conceptualities and pushing them against each other until there's like an explosion, and that's what the satori is. But without using the reason to generate that super doubt, like a mountain of doubt on top of your head, you're not gonna break to satori just throwing away your thinking. So that's a wrong way to teach Zen. In other words, just to stop thinking. If you just stop thinking, you can get a buzz, because it takes a lot of energy to have your brain think. But but your confusions come back when you stop doing it. But when you realize emptiness, you're free, and you can't go back.
Well,
You're there. You don't need to go back because you're there. You're here.
that's a bit of a stopping point. I always feel with you, there's never a stopping point. That there's an infinite bliss.
Well, there is one stopping point. I sure wish I could find some ketamine. I never tried it.
Come on, I'll visit you. You come out. I'm the legal purveyor of ketamine. We'll make a date. We do it as a medical thing, just to be legal. Good. But you are my guest of honor, and I would be glad to show for you reality.
I would love that.
And I want to thank you with all my heart. It's always such a learning experience and a pleasure to be with you.